Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, dear guests. And I should say also to our audience on CGTN live stream, because this session is on live streaming on CGTN's new media platform. I'm Zheng from CGTN, China Global Television. I'm a news anchor for our global business news program. And I follow a lot of business news in China and around the world. I'm very honored to be here to be the MC for this morning's discussion on the topic of new economic development, innovation of prospects of private sectors. And I've been told that I need to read out these topics for you, and the release of China's opinions on promoting the development and growth of the private economy points out that the private economy is a new force to promote China's modernization, an important foundation for high-quality development, which also serves as a vital force in building China into a modern country in all aspects and achieving the second century goal. So today our focuses will be how to reset reform and innovation of China's private economy, how to build private economy in a new era, and how to find their growth patterns in the current business environment, domestically and globally. How should the private sector lead innovation, green development, and high quality, and how should and where should they seek help, support from the government in doing so? I'm very glad to introduce to you our distinguished guests for our roundtable today. They are already sitting there. We'd like to introduce Wu Xiaoqing. He's the IFF Advisory Committee member of the 12th, 13th CPPCC Standing Committee, former Deputy Director of Committee on Agriculture and Rural Areas, 13th CPPCC National Committee. Mr. Wu Xiaoqing, welcome. I'd like to introduce Mr. Aswar Prasad, IFF Academic Committee Member, Senior Fellow of the Brookings Institute Global Economy and Development Project, Tulani Senior Professor of Trade Policy, Cornell University, Mr. Aswar Prasad. A very renowned economist, Yu Xiangrong, Chief China Economist, Citi. And we also have Vice President of CCPIT Guangdong Committee, Fan Xingling. And last but not least, Vice President of China Qing Group, Xu Zhiwu. Thank you. So I'd like to ask each speaker one by one to come to the stage to give about 5 minutes speech on their thinking, their understanding, their opinions on the topics of China's private economy innovation and growth. And then I'll be joining them in about 45 to 50 minutes discussion, a roundtable. We do have a very roundtable today. I'll give a guidance of these roundtable discussions. And at the last session, we have about 10 to 15 minutes time to give our audience an opportunity to raise questions to our panels. So come up next, let's welcome our first speaker. That will be Mr. Wu Xiaoqing. Please come to the stage. Thank you. You'll be doing that? Yeah, here. 到这儿。您要在那儿念吗？好，到这儿了。谢谢。好的，我们有请吴晓清主任。
Now the floor is yours, Mr. Wu. Ladies and gentlemen, a very good morning to you. In the past few years, I have been studying, analyzing, and discussing the private sector of China. So I'm very happy to be invited to this IFF 20. I asked to join this seminar and share my observations on China's private sector development. The sound and healthy development of the private sector is what China needs for a better future. And in the past 40 years since China's reform and opening up, the private sector has grown and has become a very important sector, contributing 60% of the GDP, over 50% of the taxation, 80% of jobs in cities and towns. And therefore, it is a very important part of the Chinese economy, and that is the organic demand for China's endeavor to realize its centenary goal of building socialism with Chinese characteristics for a new era. With challenges and unprecedented changes in this new era, the private sector has also met with a lot of problems and challenges. Now, in my survey around the country, I've often been approached by private businesses telling me a lot of confusions and problems they have. The first is lack of resources. The second is lack of protection of their property rights. And thirdly, difficulty of financing, as well as heavy tax. Fourthly, interruptions from the external environment. And fifthly, overexpansion of the private sector, which has led to new risks. So the reasons for the above-mentioned 5 challenges should be approached from within and outside the private sector. Firstly, from the ecosystem of the outside, there are mainly a few problems. First, we need to improve the market environment, which is fair and transparent. Although the entry for the threshold for private sector has been lowered, there are still a lot of restrictions for them. Secondly, more efforts should be made to establish a unified macro market for the private sector. And there is still discrimination against private sector. Thirdly, state-owned assets are still scattered in different sectors. The deployment and planning of the state-owned sector has had great pressure on the development of the private sector. Bidding and invitation for tender, for example, has been a discriminative treatment for private sector businesses. Fourthly, now with the protection of the right and interest of foreign funded enterprises, there is still lack of protection of the interest and rights of the private sector. Fifthly, in lawsuits, private sector has a lot of difficulties. Difficulty for collecting evidence, difficulty for launching a lawsuit, and the procedure has been complicated and difficult for them. Fifthly, in law enforcement on private sector, there is still discriminated treatment. Now, in terms of the policy making, in certain local governments, more efforts should be made to fully implement the law enforcement. There is also the lack of continuity and consistency in the implementation of laws and regulations. Some policies are in constant change. Now, with a different leadership, the laws and regulations implementation and enforcement will be different. And that can be a big problem for the private sector because they will be confused about what laws and regulations they should abide. Now, certain policies have been made but have not been enforced effectively. There is also the problem of lack of supportive public opinion. For certain policies on the central level, there have been misinterpretations on the local level. For example, common wealth has been interpreted wrongly as taking the wealth from the rich to help the poor. Now, there is also on the internet. There is also the rumors. There are also rumors against the private sector. More efforts should be made to study the private sector theoretically. I have made that point repeatedly on different occasions that we need to have more theoretical study and research on the private sector. Now, I've been talking about the external factors leading to the problems and difficulties of the private sector. Now, what about the internal problems? First, the governance of the private sector needs to improve. The ability of private sectors to tackle and offset challenges and risks is still not strong. And many of the private sector businesses do not have modernized governance. Secondly, the private sector has the problem of lack of responsibility and lack of clear understanding of the policies. And there is also the internal corruption problem. In 2021, the corruption related to private sector accounted for 62% of the total of such cases. The leakage of business secrets for self-interest, as well as corruption and bribery and it can still be a problem. Now, the private sector has contributed 70% of China's high-tech breakthroughs and innovation. Most of the
half of the private enterprises are believed to have doing nothing to this innovation, to any innovation. And some of the scientific and technological innovation stays in a very low level. According to some statistics, around 26.94% of the private enterprises have their own dedicated team of scientific research. And among that number, only 6.68% have the national recognize or in the nation recognized talents, and only 11.8% with the provincial level of recognized personnel and talents. Thirdly, the stamina and development resilience have yet to be improved. The private entrepreneurs or family-related personnel and generations, according to our research, right now, the private sector is in the process of passing the banner into the next generation. According to some statistics, around 63% of the private enterprises are passing their leadership to the next generation. Around 75% of only 7% of that number have finished their leadership transition. And the capability of risk control have yet to be improved. Only 46.6% of private enterprises have their documents to cope with potential risks, being negatively impacted by COVID-19. The private enterprises did not make the most of their small size advantage. Instead, a lot of private enterprises were very limited by the COVID-19 to have very limited growth. Ladies and gentlemen, development is the key topic, and innovation and transformation are the keys for the future. President Xi Jinping had stipulated a lot of guidelines and instructions on the development of the private sector. And all of the governmental authorities are following the guidelines. The business environment has been improved. The legal rights of the private sector has been comprehensively enhanced. In this July, the State Council released the opinions and guidance on promoting the private sector's development. Generally speaking, the local governments have had a new understanding and promotion on the development of the private sector. The first thing is there is a higher understanding of the private sector's development. The opinion stipulates that the private sector is a very important driving force for modernization with Chinese characteristics. It is also a very important factor to realize the second century goals. So this is a new development positioning for the private sector, showing the importance played by the private sector. Secondly, the opinions is talking about improving the level playing field and the systematic development for this sector. And in terms of a fair entrance level, market entrance, there are very detailed instructions on how to improve the market access for the private sector. So it's fair to say that we have great confidence to improve the private sector and help the private sector's development. Thirdly, there is a unprecedented strength and effort being put into promoting the development of this sector. Different levels of government will have their own responsibilities. NDRC has established a Bureau of Private Sector's Development. And the coordination of policy and regulations will be implemented. This is a whole set of systematic reform which will instill new vitality into the development of the private sector. So we are in a new development era for the private sector. The private sector, the private enterprises can have a brand new starting point. So they should grasp the opportunities presented in front of them. The following opportunities should be paid a lot of attention to. First of all, in terms of the momentum of the development, we can see that starting from this year, Chinese economy started to pick up, and the private sectors are closely related to the development, macro development, economic development in China. So they should implement their own strategies to have their bottleneck tackled in terms of the supply chain, demand and supply mechanism. It's fair to say that we have a huge population of 1.4 billion, and per capita GDP consumption exceeded 10,000 US dollars. The private sector will have a huge development room and space. In terms of the potential of the growth, new development concepts are understood by everybody. It will become a new momentum and driving force for the economic development. So the private sectors should enlarge their development room. Digital, the blue ocean, the blue sea of the digital economy is in front of us. The consumption internet is occupied by a lot of mega companies, but the industrial integration and convergence economy can include thousands of small private enterprises, and there are a lot of technological innovation. It is estimated that in 2022, the digital industrial revenue topped 2.2 trillion RMB yuan, and that growth rate exceeded the periodical national economic development growth. We have around 50 million registered private enterprises, and China, a 3.7% growth compared to the figure of 2012. The State Council has stipulated an opinion to strengthening and speeding up the construction of a uniform big market in China. It is talking about market unification and the productivity and the product elements. In terms of IPR improvement, market access, credit management, and competition, there are a set of complementary policies and regulations that will lay down a very solid foundation for the development of private sector. And SMEs are the most important parts and parts of the private sector. The SMEs are encouraged to take new development model, and that model has been upgraded to the National Strategic Development System. President Xi Jinping talked about this 专精克心 that is dedicated, refined, and with some focus. A lot of enterprises in this scope will dig deep in their business development. In terms of innovative supply chain and industrial supply chain, the bottlenecks will be addressed. The day before yesterday, I visited a UHD company. They have their own proprietary technologies, and they will create huge value, market value. And it's like Germany is only half or 1/4 of the United States population, 1/5 of the US GDP. But the SMEs in Germany created a large amount of value and revenue for the country. Here's my recommendations and comments. Firstly, we should put theories into practice. In theoretical research, we should understand the concept proposed by President Xi Jinping's comments on how to develop the private sector, to understand the new positioning of the private sector, and step up our efforts to do the basic disciplinary research in terms of the labor value, the surplus value, and the other concepts we should understand clearly. Theoretical research is a key. In addition to that, we should make the public aware of the importance of the private sector. Thus, we can eradicate the ideological hurdles. How can we support the development of the private sector? We should speed up the legislation first for the private sector. We should do some research on how to promote the private sector by erecting new legislations. We should strengthen our support to the productivity elements. We can have an exploration to build up a competition mechanism and cross-regional trading based on the market rules. Zhejiang, Shanghai, Guangdong. Such practice should be studied and copied. And new financing methods and measures should be given to the private sectors. Thirdly, we should have some new communication channels between the government and the private sector. This should be under the scrutinized, included in the scrutinized and monitoring list of the central government. We should grasp the opportunities presented by the historical development. Environmental protection, sustainability, and the other emerging markets opportunities should be grasped. Private sector should participate in the national strategically important projects. And the private sector should look at the 专精特新 standards that is being focused, being dedicated, and being very professional in certain areas. They should have innovations on the business model, managerial measures, and talent cultivation. They should contact the colleges and universities and vocational schools to have their own talent pool. And compliance and management practice and theories and concepts should be understood by the private sector. The private sector's businesses should abide by the law and pay back to and give their due contribution to society. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Wu.
Welcome.
The Chinese economy has scaled great heights in recent years. It's now an almost $18.5 trillion economy with a per capita income of nearly $13,000 per year. And that is a remarkable achievement for an economy of this scale and magnitude. But now that China has attained these heights, it needs a new development strategy, a new development model to ensure that it doesn't get stuck at this level of development. Now, the Chinese government clearly understands the challenges ahead and has a clear set of policy objectives in mind. These objectives, I think, are the right ones. They include rebalancing the economy so that the economy is less dependent on the property sector, is less dependent on investment, and instead have more growth come from consumption, from household consumption. There is a sense of shifting activity away from the low-skill, low-wage manufacturing sector towards the services sector. And on top of all of this, to try to move towards a more high value-added, high technology economy, and one that serves the needs of the Chinese population much better. We've seen the Common Prosperity Initiative articulated in a way that the government wants to ensure that the benefits of this growth doesn't go just to the economic and political elite, but is more broadly shared by the population. Now, these objectives are all very well, but how does one get there? And here I think the private sector plays a really important role in each of these elements of the objectives. If you think about what China needs right now, the external circumstances are not going to be favorable to China. There are many geopolitical tensions, and again, given the sheer size of China's economy, China cannot rely on demand from the rest of the world to power its economy. It needs more self-sufficiency in terms of generating domestic demand. There is also the issue that China needs much more employment growth. While China has managed to deliver phenomenal output growth, over this time, the net employment growth has been quite limited. And of course, China faces significant demographic challenges with a shrinking labor force. So that means that if China does want to shift away from an investment-heavy growth model and the labor force is shrinking, what is essential in order to generate growth is productivity. So if you think about these objectives, moving up the value-added chain, moving up in terms of the technological structure of the output, if you think about shifting towards services, the private sector becomes critical for each of these objectives. Small and medium enterprises, private enterprises have been very good traditionally at generating employment growth. Private enterprises, both small and especially the larger ones, including in the high-tech sectors, have been very good at generating innovation and productivity growth. So clearly the private sector is crucial. Now here again, the government understands this, but the question is what is needed in order to facilitate the private sector playing such a dynamic role in the economy. And Mr. Wu already very nicely laid out what I think are some of the key priorities. What the government needs to do essentially is to make sure that there is a good enabling or facilitating environment for the private sector to do well. And this means a consistent set of macroeconomic policies so that the government provides the right sort of stimulus, but more importantly, provides a clear signal to the private sector that success in the private sector will be welcomed, and that in fact private enterprises that do well will not face any restrictions of the sort we have seen in the last 2 or 3 years. Now, actions definitely speak louder than words. And while the Chinese government has been trying to send the message that it welcomes the private sector, many of the actions that the government has undertaken over the last 2 years related to firms in the technology sector, but also in the health sector, the education sector, have, I think, sent the wrong message. So what is really needed now is for the government to, through its words as well as its actions, show the private sector that in fact, it is not just going to be tolerated, but welcomed as a key participant in the growth process. And in addition, we also need many other elements, including the rule of law and the financial markets to work well. So I think what is really crucial for China at this stage is to make sure that these elements of the financial markets, but also the institutional framework, which includes better rule of law, better standards in terms of corporate governance, corporate transparency, auditing and accounting procedures, all of these are in place so that the private sector as well as markets more broadly can work very well. Because while the government talks about market discipline working well, it needs to provide the right sort of environment, in particular, the right sort of institutional framework so that markets can work well, can allocate resources to the most productive parts of the economy rather than just generating more volatility. So I think overall, the private sector really has a crucial role to play. It is good the government recognizes this. And I think the key challenge for the government right now is to make sure that it takes the steps necessary to support the private sector in accomplishing all of the economic objectives the government has set. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Prasad. I'd like to comment on your speech, but let's leave it to our roundtable discussion later on. Our next speaker is Chief China Economist from Citi, Mr. Yu Xiangrong. Welcome.
Thank you very much. I thank the organizers for inviting me to IFF 20. And taking this opportunity, I would like to share some of my observations on China's macroeconomic development and private sector growth. I'm the only representative on the round table from the capital market. So I'm going to share with you the perspective of the capital market on private sector development based on our observations. Now, you've just mentioned that there are problems and challenges for the private sector in China. We all know that. Now, based on my connections and communications with the investors, I think now the biggest problem is lack of confidence. It's a very significant lack of confidence. Just to give you a few examples, so that you can feel how serious this has been, this lack of confidence. Now, the Q3 economic growth stood at 4.9%. That's much higher than the forecast. Now, then I had a telephone call from one of my clients inquiring me about how this figure was calculated, how it stood at 4.9%. And then there are similar inquiries about the accuracy and legitimacy of this figure. And that shows that people are not confident enough to believe that the economic growth for Q3 surpassed the forecasted level. That's a sign of lack of confidence. Now, also in our daily communication with clients, I sometimes feel frustrated. Now, very often the conversation goes like this. People will discuss whether or not there will be new policies from the government. And there is the view that we shouldn't expect any new and favorable policies. And then after the new policies are made, then these people will say, well, even if there are new policies, they won't be of any use. And then if somehow they are useful and effective, then these people will say that even if you have the result, positive result from the new policies, they won't last very long. And they would also doubt whether or not the statistics are accurate. So this shows that certain people in the market will see this market as a bear's market. They don't have enough confidence in the market development. So that's a very significant problem right now. Now, confidence is gold. Now, how can we boost confidence? Now, I have 3 points to make. Now, we have had a very good presentations from Minister Wu and Professor Prasad. Now, I think, first of all, we need to go against the difficulties to stabilize our economy. Now, one of the most important lessons we have learned from China's reform and opening up in the past 4 decades is that we need to sometimes go against the obstacles and make solutions out of the development. Now, for us to realize a higher level rate of development, that's definitely possible. For Q3, it was 4.9%. The actual growth for the private sector was only 3.5%. Now, the economy didn't have enough impetus. And now, based on the Keynes theory, there needs to be measures taken to stimulate the overall demand. And that should work. Now, people's feelings are quite different from what the macro statistics have shown. Now, the nominal growth is what people actually feel. For example, the increase of the income of the households, the purchasing power growth, and people don't feel that the economy has grown at that level. That's because of the discrepancies of the nominal growth and the actual growth. So, specifically, I think next year it's possible for Chinese economy to maintain at a growth rate of 5%. Now, for the market, for the private sector, and for the investors, that is a very strong signal to show that the priority of the Chinese government is to stabilize its economic growth. Now, looking back from year 2012, Chinese economic growth has started to turn to the L shape. Now, if the government doesn't really have that high expectation for the growth, should the private sector also lower their expectations for high growth? I think that's very important for the L shape development.
And should we also do something to adjust our expectation? Are we at a particular stage that L-shape development model has touched the floor? Should we change a little bit? For me, I think we can have a higher expectation on the next year's development goal. then everybody will ask a follow-up question. How can we do that? How can we achieve that? For IMF's forecast, 4.2% of GDP growth will be realized in China. And of course, IMF is considering a lot of difficulties presented by the real estate market and the external turmoils. And of course, we need to have some extra stimulus. 4.2 to 5, it will be around 1 trillion RMB yuan of GDP growth. So this is only a difference of 1 trillion. The earlier of this year, we have seen the government has released this 1 trillion stimulus plan package. I have a preliminary suggestion. And this year, the budget deficit ratio increased from 3.3% to 3.5% this year. And probably next year, the 3.8% will be maintained. And then the fiscal expansion will be realized. And that can fulfill 5.5% of GDP growth goal. We are having a pressure of the downturn development of the real estate market. The government can support the city village renovation and rejuvenation. How can we do the financing? We actually have some measures. Previously, PSL of the central bank can be loaned to the local banks to fund some concrete, real household buildings for the real estate enterprises. I am confident that 5% of GDP growth will be achieved next year. GDP growth can tackle a lot of problems. This is the first step to stabilize people's confidence. The second opinion of mine is that we should have multi-measures to stabilize asset price. China is facing this deflation pressure. And the United States is having some inflation problem. People will say, well, the United States issued 5 trillion bonds of subsidies, giving money to the general public directly. We have a large amount of deposit in China. We have around an extra of 25 trillion yuan of the deposit. So we can actually transfer that deposit into the consumption power and the future economic development growth. But why don't people just spend money? They don't have confidence. In the United States, you can see there is another round of stimulus policies. The US government is giving money to the general public, stimulating the real estate market as well as the consumer market. The net asset doubled compared with the figures in the pandemic era. The net asset doubled, and that boosts the confidence of the general public. They are willing to spend money. So it is an encouraging example. In Q2 and in this summer break, we had a lot of discussion about the Japanization. What does it mean by Japanization? Our asset price is still very solid. There's no explosion. Under these circumstances, if everybody is very concerned about the explosion, then how can they have the confidence to do some investment? My recommendations go as follows. I think these measures can stabilize the asset price and boost the confidence of the private sector and the general consumers. The first thing is stabilizing the price of housing. We can look at Hong Kong's example. When Hong Kong's housing price decreased, the Hong Kong government is tightening the supply of the land. Right now, we have done a lot of adjustment in the demand side. For example, decreased the mortgage ratio and the down payment amount. But people still are very worried. Will the price of the housing plummeted further? Sometimes I think people are too worried. And if they want to sell their apartment right now, it's not the case that you can sell it immediately when you put your apartment into the market. In Guangdong province, we have seen some practice. That is the rejuvenation of or the redevelopment of the city villages by giving some subsidies to the villagers. More land will be put into the market to have some realistic housing projects. Secondly, we should develop this safeguard type of housing programs. The government have readjusted the status of certain housing buildings to make them the incentives based housing projects. The second thing is the stock market. People have been talking about leveling funds. It's very possible that we can have this kind of fund. FDI and the market momentum and mindset are not very upbeat. So the government should instill some vitality into the market. We should give ourselves some confidence. Here, I believe that this kind of leveling funds can play its own role. A stabilizing fund can play its role. In the past few years, a lot of entrepreneurs didn't know what to do. It's not about the interest rate or is it more subsidies. Entrepreneurs want to have some predictable macroeconomic environment for them to do the business. So we should have more comprehensive structural reform. What I want to emphasize is on the transparency and stability of policies. The experience in China is that if we have further opening up, then the market can be very vital and vivid, so the market stakeholders can develop. We have a black horse. I'm sorry, we eradicated the so-called black hole in the custom declaration. It seems like it's kind of easy to introducing some regulation, but it's very difficult to eradicate some old practice. The tightening period probably should be stopped. Now we should have a comparatively easy environment for the business to develop. We have seen the issue of the opinions on promoting the private sector's development. It's a huge document, but it has yet to impress people in the private sector. It has a lot of clauses, people have some doubts about how to implement those clauses and those items. I think we should look at the priority. First, we should stabilize the asset price to fend off people's worries about some negative aftermath. And then we should do structural reform to realize a transparent, predictable, and easing business environment. I think this is very important for the development of the private sector. I welcome your feedback. Thank you very much.
Coming up next is our next speaker, Vice President of CCPIT Guangdong Committee, Mr. Fan Xingling. Thank you.
Honorable guests, entrepreneurs. First, very honored to be part of this event organized by IFF. I'll take this opportunity on behalf of CCPIT Guangdong. I'll express my gratitude to the organizer and congratulations on the convocation of this forum. And thank you very much for your long-term support to the foreign trade of Guangdong. Today, we are talking about innovation and development of the private sector. I'll take this opportunity to talk about the private sector in Guangdong province. Guangdong's private sector is very huge. The unit number, the taxation levied, importation and exportation, and other indexes have been ranking #1 in the country for several years. When Guangdong is embarked on the journey of industrialization, private sector have contributed a lot. Last year, it contributed around 60% of the taxation levied. The GDP contribution up to 50%, and 80% of the extra employment, 90% of the extra newly established companies. Up to June, right now, the registered number of the private businesses top 16 million. It is ranking the first in the country. For the first 3 quarters, private sector's import and exportation reached 3.69 trillion RMB yuan, an increase of 6.6%. That is increased 3.8% of the total import and export in Guangdong. In terms of promotion of the economic development, innovation, improving people's lifestyle, and stabilizing the trade circumstances in Guangdong, the private sector have played a very important role, being the major driving force of the economic development in Guangzhou province. Right now, the global economy is very, very complex. The political environment is so very in turmoil, creating a lot of opportunities and challenges for the private sector.
On the one hand, the private sector accounted for 70% of technological innovation in China. In Guangdong, for example, Huawei and BYD are leaders of technological innovation. On the other hand, with the containment of the West on China's technological development, the private sector needs to play a more important role in promoting science and technological innovation. Now, in recent years, the central government has promulgated a number of policies aimed at fostering a better environment for the private sector growth. Despite these policies, private sector still faces some difficulties, including, for example, talent introduction and the environment for growth, as well as heavy taxation. Now, in the 20th CPC National Congress, new policies were made to stimulate high-quality growth of the private sector. CCPIT is the government department that supports the private sector growth. CCPIT Guangdong will leverage its strengths, especially its critical role of connecting the government and the private sector to provide better services to the private sector, expand their friend circle, and create better platforms for them. First, we need to help the private sector prevent foreign currency exchange risks, trade friction risks. Secondly, we need to continuously optimize the business environment. Now, for the delegation of power, service of the private sector, a better monitoring system, and fostering a transparent and fair and just business environment for them. We still have a lot to do. Minister Wu and Mr. Yu both mentioned lack of confidence as a key challenge for the private sector. Thirdly, we need to empower the private sector. Private sector should not only be the ballista of economic growth, but also should be a pioneer of technological innovation. So in terms of the conventional sectors, the private sector still faces the problems of lack of impetus for innovation and lack of resources. So we need to foster a number of private sector enterprises that have a specialized strength in specialized sectors. Fourthly, we need to help the private sector have greater social responsibilities and better serve the need of the society. With the above-mentioned measures, we hope that the private sector in Guangdong will still pioneer the private sector of the whole nation. We also hope that the private sector will grow healthily. Together with the private sector, we need to work hard to foster a better environment so that they can achieve high-quality growth. Thank you very much.
Our final speaker, Vice President of Change Group, Mr. Xu Zhiwu. 徐志武先生，谢谢。
Ladies and gentlemen, good morning. It's my great pleasure to be invited to this seminar to discuss the innovation and future for the private economy in China. I think we need to promote the strength of reform and innovation of the private sector. Since China implemented the policies of reform and opening up, the private sector has played a more and more important role in improving people's livelihood, creating jobs, and driving the economic growth and innovation. The private sector has already become a key player in China's economy. Now, with unprecedented challenges and with the transition from the localized regionalization to regionalized localization, we are now in a new round of scientific and technological development. The private sector in China now has challenges as well as more responsibility, more opportunities. AI, the network of things, blockchain, as well as the integrated, the further integration of resources have presented the private sector with more opportunities. The private sector in China contributed more than half of the innovation and innovation talents. 80% of the specialized enterprises, many private sector businesses are leading the whole nation in technological breakthroughs. Take Qint Group as an example. We have been consistently developing green technologies and green electronic appliances and green technological development. We have invested in a total of 30 GW of photovoltaic power stations. And in the recent years, we have been a witness of the development of the photovoltaic power generation sector. With the support of the central government and with the joint efforts with the local governments, we have played our part in making China's photovoltaic sector a world leader. Now, the electricity bill, we have been able to, with our technological breakthrough, lowered the per watt price for photovoltaic generated electricity from 1.15 yuan RMB to only 15 to 20 cents Chinese RMB. Now, the photovoltaic sector has already become one of the 3 new pillars of China's export. Now, I'm still very confident that there is a bright future for the private sector in China. We need to embrace the opportunities for better private sector development. In the future, we need to further promote technological innovation and promote the integrated development of innovation, financing, and manufacturing. More financial services should be available for the private sector. We also need to turn our international vision to a vision in support of the private sector growth. With international cooperation and cross-border financial services, the global value chain of the private sector can be established to enhance the competitiveness of the private sector. With that, I thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for all the presentations.
We plan to have 5 minutes for each, but I think we half an hour later than our plan, so we're gonna cut our 40 minutes later than our plan, so we're going to cut our roundtable. We're trying to shorten our questions and shorten our answers. So if I raise a question, please answer it within 1 minute. 我们尽量1分钟回答一个问题，这样我们有更多的这个交互的环节。My first question is to Professor Prasad because we travel such a long distance to Guangzhou. So we really appreciate your attendance. So my first question is to you. We've seen so many Western negative comments on China's economy, all these China doom theories. You know, I subscribe to many Western media outlets. So every morning I get alert about bad news on China. But if after you travel to the country, what kind of environment do you see? What's your general opinion of the status of the Chinese economy?
So after having come to China about 2 or 3 times in the last 3 months, I must say that the recent data and also the policies that the government seems to be undertaking have made me a little less worried about the short term. I think that China can generate growth in the 4.5% to 5% range this year, perhaps even next year. The bigger concern I have, though, is about the medium to long term, and that is exactly connected to the issues we have been talking about in this panel, because I think the private sector is really crucial to China's longer term growth prospects. And if you look at some of the data related to the private sector, household consumption is not doing too badly, but certain categories of consumption don't seem to be doing well. We've seen household saving rising, and in particular, we've seen private investment decline quite significantly. Even if you take out real estate investment, which of course has been quite negative because of the property market difficulties, overall private investment does seem to be trending down in terms of growth rates. And I think this speaks to a lack of confidence in the government's policy-making direction. And I think that is the real challenge right now, how the government can restore the confidence of the private sector. And Mr. Yu, for instance, will speak about this issue.
You mean the government needs to be very decisive now, right?
It needs to be decisive, and it also needs to put in place a set of policies that are really about supporting the private sector. And some of these changes take a while. You know, we spoke about the rule of law, getting the financial system working very well. None of these changes can be put in place overnight, but I think the direction of policies for the government to show that it is moving in the right direction to encourage the private sector is really the key right now.
Okay, you mentioned Mr. Yu, so my next question to Mr. Yu. You are suggesting the government to be very decisive to pursue a 5% growth next year by enlarging the debt market to enlarging its deficit to 3.8%. Do you think the government would do that? You suggest that. Do you think the government will do that? Is it likely to do that?
And I think it's also likely, right? The reason is that the reason the policy development seems to show a greater sense of urgency from Beijing to support the economy, right? Usually you don't revise your budget, at this late stage of a year, right? So I think that's certainly, I think, suggesting something. More importantly, I also think, to address this confidence issue, I think we also needed to learn the lesson from reopening, right? After reopening, I think our policy movement was kind of slow. I think basically we were in a wait and see mode in the first half of this year. Now looking back, I think it may be logic, right? Because if confidence, improve along with the data improvements, then I think indeed Beijing want to look at this time window to repair policy capacity, to regain the policy room. But the issue is that the confidence didn't follow up timely. So with this, extended confidence issue, we basically think with policy should ride on the activity momentum, to, as you mentioned, to be decisive to get the economy out of this confidence trap.
Okay, Mr. Yu, but China's decisive central government policy cannot change many factors, because, such as geopolitical tensions overseas, federal rates, very key, important issue. We have a expert on monetary policy sitting up here, but he's not going to speak. But I know everyone knows that Fed rates is going to influence a lot of money flows. The jobs market, not great, very moderate. Asia market, you mentioned it, very moderate, breaking 3,000 points on the Shanghai Composite real estate debt problem needs quite a long time to mitigate the the crisis, right? So even we have the central government policy very decisive, there's still a lot of areas that needs time to mitigate the crisis. Let me ask a question to Zheng Tai, Mr. Fan. 范先生，就是我想问您一个比较有意思的问题，就是
I have a question for you.
做一个非常大的这个民营企业，范先生，您做一个比较对大的，徐总，不好意思，
Sorry, Mr. Xu. Chint Group is a huge private enterprise. I want to ask your feelings. How do you feel like the development of the private sector, including investment? You talk about a lot of good opportunities presented towards your group. You can have investment opportunities in the new renewable energy sector. Are you confident? We have a basic understanding toward the Chinese economy. I think China's economy is resilient, although there will be problems periodically, but I think those problems can be conquered and tackled. We have three beliefs. First, we believe in the wisdom of the national leadership. We believe the environment, business environment, market environment will be better and better. And every challenges, every risk will present opportunities. Crisis and opportunities are coexisting. The thing is how we as the innovative entity can grasp the opportunities. The third phase is that I believe in the innovative cultural strengths of China. And every entrepreneur is having the wisdom and stability and resilience to tackle the problems that are faced by them. So in the last few years, in green energy, renewable energy, and smart grid and smart electricity, we have been doing a lot of contribution. And in the next plan of our group, we are going to continuously invest in those sectors. We believe, we are very confident about the long-term, mid-term development. Smart electricity is your one of your business sectors, and also you have new investment in the renewable energy. What are the reasons of your success? Your understanding on the regulations and policies, your correct forecast of the future market development trend, or your investment in R&D of scientific and technological R&D. I think all of them, we have been doing a lot of things for all of the factors that you mentioned. We have been continuously investing in technological improvement. We started as an enterprise to produce some electrical device. We started in Yueqing County, Wenzhou City, Zhejiang Province. We want to have high quality products. If our products are very good, and we should stick to proprietary innovation. We have been sticking to that principle. We've been in this PV industry for more than 10 years. But when we entered this market, we actually believe that probably it will take a very long time before the electricity can be connected with the grid. Previously, PV industry need a lot of subsidies from the government, but right now we don't need the subsidies. We can have our own development.
China is heavily subsidizing our new energy sectors might not be relevant anymore. OK， 下面一个问题是给我们的范总的啊，范总在广东省，因为刚才徐总的公司是在浙江省，那广东省也是一个明显。
Mr. Xi's company is located in Zhejiang province, and Mr. Fan, as the chairman of the CCPIT, you understand Guangdong provincial development, and the private sector has seen a lot of development. And there are a lot of governmental regulations supporting the private sector to make them grow better and bigger. To our understanding, the more developed a region is, the more developed the private sector will be. Can you please brief us on the correct actions taken by the provincial government of Guangdong to help the private sector's development? Just now, I heard about what Professor Prasad talked about his concerns for the long-term economic development. I understand fully. Also, Mr. Xi from Chent Group talking about his confidence from the perspective of enterprise towards the economic development in China. So you can see that there are two mindsets. Just now, I talked about the statistics of the private sector. CCPIT Guangdong has been providing a very good bridge for the private sector to connect the industry and the governmental authorities. We have over 30 overseas representatives offices in the overseas countries because we wanted to serve our overseas partners as well as the local business going global. Mr. Prasad talk about the resilience and the confidence issue. I think we can help address those issues. Also, I think entrepreneurs should thoroughly analyze the regulations and policies issued by different levels of government. Sometimes it takes time for those regulations and policies to be executed and implemented, but those regulations will definitely contribute to the private sector's development.
Reaction, your response to their intakes, including our first speaker, Mr. Vice Minister's, Deputy Minister's speech. He's been very critical, right on the point. It surprises me how critical he is. His in-depth, his knowledge from China's policymakers into the problems of the current private companies in China. What's your take on that? Everyone is so clearly, aware of the situation here. They're very specific, very critical.
Yeah, I think it's encouraging that a senior government official like himself is willing to talk so openly about the many constraints on private enterprise in China and the need for a number of improvements in the regulatory structure, in the rule of law and property rights and so forth. Now, the private sector is not, filled with companies that are all ideal. There are many businesses that are not going to work. There are some businesses that are probably deserve to be, not have a place in the market. But I think the important issue is to let the market determine the success of private enterprises and give good business ideas, give good entrepreneurs the ability to succeed. And that really is the role of the government to create this foundation so that private enterprises can do well without directly interfering in the operation of the markets. So it was good to hear the very clear articulation about all the problems that China faces in making sure that private enterprises feel that they are well supported. And I hope that the government will take those messages to heart and put in place those important reforms.
Thank you so much. 我们再给5分钟的时间给台下的观众提问。
Yeah, now the floor is open for questions. If you have any questions, please raise your hand.
这边有位男士先举手了。
你好，我是来自中国地质调查局发展研究中心的。
I am from the research center of the Technological Study Commission. My question goes to
是新结构经济学的一个药方。
Yu Xiangrong.
听下来觉得
You talk about
有个关键词
a
顺序。
solution.
就是我们想要达到
If I understand you correctly, then probably we should pay attention to the sequence
顺序非常重
or the order
您刚才提到了我们当前
to realize the economic development goals. So the first step is stabilizing investment, stabilizing confidence.
我觉得于老师
What is the next step?
增加
I think the first step is
达到5%的
budget expenditure
对，
to realize 5% of economic growth. I think this is a very good question.
来自地质部门的同事真的是非常了不起。
Thank you.
对，感谢问题啊。那个，从这个确实我想说呢，就是提振
这个摄影师抓得很好，正好把提问和那个回答问题的2个人都放到一个画面里。啊，您就这
So
么
both of you are
我想呢
on the same screen.
已经其实无非两招嘛，对吧？
How
一
to
个就是
improve
增
confidence.
长，一个就是改革，对吧？
Two things: growth and reform.
或者说怎么提振这个
How?
经济发展的这个营商环境？那我们那个
How to do the reform? How to improve the environment, business environment of the private sector?
从这个角度呢，
We've already had a lot of documents and regulations and policies from the central government,
还是比较偏弱的。
but still people's confidence have yet to be improved because they are looking at the things right now in front of them.
提到的这个
For example, deflation, or inflation, or price of housing.
都要爆了，那我
If the asset price is going to explode, and how do they want? How can they improve their confidence? But his question is
那债务这个事情呢，那中央已经说了会
the expenditure,
第二步要做。
national treasury bond. It's the first step. What about the second step?
在民营经济的意见啊，这个加快落地。
I think we should execute the policy
那
in that guideline document.
这大的方向，我想无非是我其实之前讲的无非2点。第一
Direction wise, we can
讲了这个文呢，就是那落地是一方面，对吧？另一方面就是
see the implementation of the guideline document.
希望看到的是一个比较一致、可预期、透明的。
And the other thing is that people want to have a predictable, transparent, and stable
也讲到，其实我们的这个
business environment.
那就是
Also mentioned by the professor and the Mr. Wu,
目前我们
we should have very reasonable market price.
是收紧为主，对吧？但我
In the previous stage,
接下来
the policy is about tightening
阶段，其实我们要松一松。
all of the elements. Right now, probably we should easing.
市场主导的，对，
So tightening and easing should be used
相对宽松的，
periodically.
这个大家轻松一点，可能就有利于经济发展。
好嘞
I think if everybody is very relaxed, then it will be contributing to the economic success.
我来自清华大学，
I'm from Tsinghua University. I'm a postdoc
就刚开始那个吴主任
student.
和陈会长都提到那个民营企业
Mr. Wu and Mr. Chen talk about private sector's contribution to 70% of the patent holding.
发明专利，我们国家已经达到400多万。
Now, in terms of the invention patent, we have in China more than 4 million.
针对这个问题，
But the translation of these invention has not been very effective. So maybe Mr. Xu can answer that question. Now we have over 10,000 patents worldwide. What about your R&D team? We have 4,516 professionals working in our R&D team. That is quite big, an R&D team. I think we need to first of all attach great importance to the introduction and attraction of talents. Now, we are all very aware of the importance of attraction of talents, but in terms of investment, the actions have failed to follow the words. But for Qing Group, we have made huge investment and we have created a lot of mechanisms. We have the training, the system. We train our shareholders into professionals, and we train our professionals into shareholders. Now, to follow up that, is it that because Qing is a very strong company financially, and you have a great tradition of R&D, so that you can make huge investment into that endeavor. But for other businesses that are smaller and not as strong as Qing Group, they may have the difficulties of making such investment. That's true. I think we need to make continuous investment, but for the startups, they need to better use their investment, and they need to think about the demand of the client or the need of the client, and they shouldn't make blind investment into R&D, and they need to direct their investment to where it's most needed. Now, for long-term and for short-term investment, all the R&D and all the patent of the enterprise should target at the demand and the need of your clients and customers. And you should have this industry-oriented mindset of making investment into R&D. So efficiency and industry demand are the things that enterprises should bear in mind when they make investment. I think Qing Group has been doing very well in that, but many other private sector businesses, they don't actually want to translate those invention patents. They only want to create patents so that they can have a greater bargain with the government and have more government support. Well, and this question is for maybe CCPIT, Guangdong. Mr. Fan, how would you, what is your take on that? In, for example, the new energy sector, and many enterprises just make innovation for the sake of have a greater bargaining chip with the government and have greater government subsidies. Well, it's true that some medium-sized and small enterprises have that mindset. But with the growth of the private sector, I don't think that will continue to be the problem. I don't think enterprises will continue to see the innovation as only a means to gain more government subsidies and government support. They will have organic demand for innovation. And CCPIT and other government departments will certainly be supportive. The final question, lady over there. Okay, so please be very, very brief. Question for Mr. Fan. Now, the going global of the private sector to explore the international market. Now, many small and medium-sized enterprises have orders, and they will just go abroad, go global. Now, how would you see the opportunities and challenges for the private businesses to explore the international market? I will be very brief. If you are not a member of CCPIT yet, do join us and do join the Guangdong Chamber of International Commerce, because different countries have different legal requirements and regulations, and the enterprises need to be fully aware of these laws and regulations. So we will provide services for our members. Secondly, and for Guangdong province, and the platform building is open and transparent. We have a lot of resources that can be shared on the platform. So we have professional teams in support of the going global of the private sector.
Let me ask you this question because you're a professor of trade. How would Chinese private companies go abroad and compete globally? Your advice? Probably in the United States, for example.
The geopolitical environment is going to be a little complicated, but I think there is still room for Chinese enterprises given that they are quite productive, they are quite innovative to be able to compete effectively. And the question really comes down to, once again, what the enabling environment is within China itself, because domestically, if the environment is good, I think it creates an opportunity for Chinese enterprises to scale up to the extent they can compete effectively. And we've seen many examples of them being able to do that effectively. But again, the question is whether the domestic environment is going to be suitable for that.
OK， 我也跟大家分享一点我这2天的看法，就是我碰到一个专家，他跟我说的一点很好，就是如果一个
Thank you for that. Now, an expert told me recently that if an enterprise can be successful in China, it's more likely to be successful outside China. So for investors that want to make investment in China, they will see if there are successful Chinese companies that are overseas. Now, if there are successful Chinese enterprises overseas, overseas investors will be more willing to make investments. So for the businesses that aim at going global, they would first of all think about whether they can be successful in the Chinese market. And if they can be successful, they can use their experience to explore the international market. Thank you very much. That will be the end of the seminar.
Platform to see the review, the rewind of the whole show this morning. Thank you.